Bitcoin, the revolutionary cryptocurrency that changed the way we think when it comes to money. If you were to put 100 people from across the world in one room, the chances are that 90 of them will know about Bitcoin. About 10 of them would either know someone who's in some way involved with it or be involved with it themselves, but maybe only one person would know and be able to explain how Bitcoin actually works. But why? Why is it so complex? What about Bitcoin is different? Why is it more secure than other ways of dealing with money? Why is it even revolutionary? In this video, I'm going to try to answer some of these questions with the level of knowledge that I have of Bitcoin and with my personal opinion. The first reason why I think Bitcoin is brilliant is because of the mathematical foundation of it. In order to talk about this, first I need to explain how Bitcoin works. Here's a brief summary. Bitcoin works using the blockchain technology. A blockchain is a list of blocks where each block contains a number of transactions that people made. Each block is connected to the previous one with a really long random number. In order for a transaction to be validated, this number must be guessed by a computer. There's no way to calculate this number, you have to guess it. Since the number is very long, this task takes some time to complete even for computers. To reduce the time needed to find this number, there are thousands of computers around the world who work together to complete this task. These are so-called nodes of the Bitcoin network. Today, these computers need about 10 minutes to complete this task and validate a transaction. In summary, a blockchain is a list of transactions that were made since the invention of Bitcoin. Those transactions are organized in blocks, and blocks form a chain. But where is the math in all of this? Well, you know the really long random number that connects two blocks together? That number, even though it can't be calculated, it's not completely random. The number is generated based on the information of the current block. I'm talking about things like who sent the money to who, at what time, what amount, etc. Another important thing that is stored in a block is the random number of the previous block. This is what chains blocks together. So all this data is fed into an algorithm that spits out a number that computers around the world have to guess. Let's say that we have this block of transactions. Now let's say Jack wants to change some information in the second transaction. Let's say he wants to change the amount of the transaction and say that Sophie gave him $1,000 instead of $500. If he did that, the random number of the block would be completely different because the information inside the block has changed. So Jack would now have to let his computer search for the new random number that was generated. Another thing, let's look at the next transaction in the block. The random number for that transaction was already generated, but now the information in this block has changed. The number of the previous block has changed, so now this block has a new random number as well. Jack has to use his computer to find this number too. He has to do this for every transaction that occurred after the one he tried to modify. Now, the task of finding out the random number is not an easy one. It's actually very hard and computationally expensive. All Bitcoin nodes around the world need about 10 minutes to figure it out. So you can imagine how long it would take Jack and his computer to figure it out on his own. This is what makes the blockchain system mathematically impossible to penetrate. A combination of math and cryptography to make the most secure payment system to date. What makes this even better is that with every new transaction, the system becomes stronger and more secure. This by itself is brilliant. This is a good segue to my second point, which is security. When I was explaining how Bitcoin works, I forgot to mention one very important thing. Remember the blockchain that contains the list of all transactions ever made using Bitcoin? Well, that list is public. In fact, you can go on Google right now and type in Bitcoin blockchain blocks, and the first website that pops up will give you a list of blocks and transactions that occurred since the beginning. And for every transaction, you can see the amount that was sent, who sent the money to who, at what time, and other details. Of course, the users are not identified with their real name or anything private like that. Instead, they have a public address, which is a bunch of random numbers and letters. So how is this a good idea? If you went 50 years back in time and told any bank that their transactions can be public, they would call you insane. Even today, if you ask a random person and tell them that making transactions public would make the system safer, they would say you're out of your mind. Well, the key is in the concept of decentralization. The blockchain is distributed to thousands of nodes around the globe. Every node has a copy of the current state of the blockchain. Whenever a new transaction is made and successfully validated, the node that managed to validate it adds it to the list of transactions, and then all the other nodes can accept it and update their list. Now let's say somebody wants to either change a previous transaction or make an invalid one. Even if he convinces his node that the transaction should be valid, the transaction would be broadcasted around the globe and all the other nodes would just reject it and say that it's invalid. The system works by listening to the majority of nodes, assuming that they're trustworthy. As long as there's more quote-unquote good nodes, the system works perfectly. And even better, the more nodes are added, the more secure the system is. This might have been a problem if there were, let's say, 3 nodes in the whole world, and the attacker somehow managed to control all 3 of them. But at this point in time, the system has thousands of nodes running, and it is impossible for anyone to modify the blockchain in any way. And there's something about this idea that is fascinating. I'm pretty sure I heard a quote from a TV show that said that the best way to keep a secret is to make it public. That way, nothing about it would be so interesting. Another thing that should be mentioned when it comes to the topic of Bitcoin security is that people started using it for illegal activities. Since there's no way to track down someone who, for example, sold drugs using Bitcoin, it seemed like the perfect outlet for drug dealers and similar things. This is definitely one of the downsides of the blockchain system. However, according to the Chainalysis report, in 2019, criminal activity represented only 2.1% of all cryptocurrency transaction volume. The blockchain system, and Bitcoin as the first ever cryptocurrency, were first introduced in 2008 by a Japanese man called Satoshi Nakamoto. He chose to keep his identity private, but in 2008 he published a paper called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, on a cryptography forum online. His paper caught the attention of other cryptography enthusiasts, and Satoshi started working on the Bitcoin software with a number of other developers. In January 2009, he released the first version of the Bitcoin software and launched the network by mining the first ever block, which had a reward of 50 Bitcoins. Today, Satoshi is the person with the most Bitcoins in the world, and his identity still remains unknown. To me, all of this reminds me of a movie plot and makes me question why he chose to remain in the shadows. Does he know something we don't, or did he do it just to keep himself safe? This is, in my opinion, something that definitely brought the mystery factor to this story, and that helped the overall popularity of Bitcoin. I don't think Bitcoin would be where it is today if it wasn't published the way it was. Anyhow, if Bitcoin is something you're interested in, and if you want to find out more about it, I suggest that you start by reading Satoshi's paper. You can easily find it on Google. It is still public and available on the Bitcoin website. It's written in simple language, and it's fairly easy to understand by an average person. Interestingly enough, this ties to the idea I was talking about earlier, how the most valuable things are public and free and right there in front of us. The last thing I want to talk about is the potential of blockchain. Bitcoin is the first digital currency to remove the need for a trusted authority. In the case of money, the trusted authority would be a bank. But what if we can take this even further and incorporate it in other areas of life? What if we didn't have to put our trust in big companies and sellers? What if we didn't have to rely on anybody to count our votes during an election? What if all of our criminal records were completely public and decentralized? I believe that the blockchain technology can not only solve banking problems, but ethical problems as well. I believe that blockchain can potentially solve or at least reduce corruption if everything is done right. We shall see, but I remain hopeful. At the time of this recording, Bitcoin is worth $54,000. I can't imagine a future without Bitcoin and more specifically the blockchain technology. I'm excited to see where all this goes and how it affects our everyday lives. Until then, thank you for watching and I'll see you soon.